The curious case of medieval medicine. Hey guys, tonight, let's do something a little different. I want you to dim the lights, get comfortable, maybe wrap yourself in a blanket, and just float into the strange, slow-moving world of medieval medicine. Yes, medicine, or at least what people thought was medicine. This isn't going to be dramatic or thrilling, it's more like drifting down a river of oddly specific habits, slightly misguided beliefs, and a few royal disasters along the way. Because why not spend an hour imagining yourself sneezing in the 14th century? So, picture it. You're in the Middle Ages. Maybe you're a peasant in a mud-walled cottage, or perhaps a noble with a slightly drafty castle. Someone mentions feeling a little feverish, and instantly, the gears of medieval healthcare begin turning. And by gears, I mean herbs, strange rituals, and occasionally, a hefty dose of superstition. First off, the most common advice you'd get was probably from someone claiming to understand the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Yes, medieval folks believed your health depended entirely on whether your bodily fluids were balanced. So, if you were pale and sluggish, it wasn't because your diet was terrible or you didn't sleep enough, no, clearly your phlegm was off. And the cure? Well, that might involve a good bloodletting. Or 3. Bloodletting was everywhere. Barbers, who doubled as surgeons for some reason, often kept a razor handy not just for your chin but for your veins. They believed letting out a bit of blood would restore balance. Of course, they didn't exactly have precise measurements. A little too enthusiastic, and suddenly a minor headache could turn into something much more serious. But hey, at least it looked professional. Meanwhile, herbal remedies were quietly floating around. People didn't have pharmacies, but they did have gardens. Fever. Chamomile tea. Infection. Garlic poultices. Upset stomach. A nice bit of sage. And if all else failed, there was always a little experimental concoction from the local apothecary, which could be anything from powdered roots to crushed gemstones. Because, apparently, grinding rocks into a powder and sprinkling them over a wound was supposed to help. Now, let's float over to the elites for a second, because royal illness was its own special kind of spectacle. Kings and queens, being particularly prone to overcomplication, often had a team of physicians, each one more confident than the next, all offering conflicting advice. One might suggest a rigorous purge, another a cooling bath, while the king himself just hoped no one noticed he was turning a slightly alarming shade of green. And sometimes, because why not, they'd consult astrology. That's right. The positions of planets might dictate whether your humors needed more blood or less. Medieval kings had charts and horoscopes that literally told them when to sneeze or when to bathe. Speaking of bathing, hygiene was inconsistent. Nobles bathed occasionally, often with herbs and scented oils, but many thought that water itself was dangerous. A peasant might rarely see a bath, while a queen might soak weekly in perfumed water, hoping the scent would ward off illness. Of course, neither method truly prevented disease. But it's nice to imagine royalty lounging in a tub surrounded by lavender petals while their physician argued about which humor had gone rogue. And then there were the charms and prayers. Illness wasn't always physical, sometimes, it was spiritual. A mild fever might be blamed on a wandering spirit, or perhaps the wrath of a saint for some minor offense, like forgetting to leave a candle lit. Holy water, relics, and whispered prayers became part of the medical routine, often alongside the bloodletting and herbal teas. Because nothing says effective healthcare like combining superstition with scalpels. Of course, certain illnesses inspired creative solutions. Let's take smallpox, for instance. If you were lucky enough to survive, you might have scars to remind you that medieval medicine, while well-intentioned, had its limits. Some attempted early inoculation techniques, but mostly people just suffered through it. Meanwhile, measles, plague, and a host of other infectious diseases swept through towns with the delightful efficiency of a medieval tax collector. Everyone knew someone who had fallen ill, and that someone often had very strange advice for the rest of the village. Interestingly, diet played a major role, at least theoretically. Spices, vinegar, wine, and certain meats were believed to influence your humors. Eat too much of one thing, and the resulting imbalance could cause a headache, vomiting, or even melancholy. Yes, melancholy. Which, of course, might be treated with more bloodletting, herbs, or a little music. Medieval people had a habit of turning almost every small inconvenience into a multi-step ritual. Now, let's peek at childbirth, which was basically a medieval roller coaster of worry. Fever, bleeding, and infection were constant threats. Midwives were experts at herbal remedies, chants, and positioning, but despite their knowledge, mortality rates were high. Even queens sometimes succumbed to complications, proving that wealth didn't always equal safety. And after all the bloodletting, herbs, and prayers, babies and mothers survived more often thanks to luck than skill. But hey, the ritualistic process itself was calming, or at least it looked calm. Mental health was another interesting area. A king feeling sad or lethargic might be diagnosed with melancholy, often attributed to an excess of black bile. Treatment: more bloodletting, purges, walks in the garden, or cheerful music played by slightly confused minstrels. If you were a peasant, your therapy might be a visit to the local priest, a prayer, or a cup of something bitter but aromatic. Either way, medieval medicine had a solution for everything, some more effective than others. Even surgery existed, though it was minimal. A broken bone might be wrapped, a wound stitched, but invasive procedures were rare unless absolutely necessary. Pain relief was primitive, opium, alcohol, or just gritting your teeth and hoping for the best. Surgeons operated in dim light, with tools that today would barely pass as kitchen utensils. And yet, some people survived. Miracles of resilience, or sheer luck? Probably a mix of both. Let's not forget hygiene in hospitals. Yes, they had hospitals, often run by monks. But cleanliness wasn't a priority. Beds were shared, linen rarely washed, and infections spread rapidly. Monks and nuns did their best with prayers and herbal washes, but sometimes simply sitting quietly and hoping you didn't touch the wrong surface was the most effective medicine available. And so, as we drift along, it becomes clear that medieval healthcare was an intricate, strangely comforting combination of observation, superstition, ritual, and a tiny bit of actual effectiveness. People understood that certain herbs could soothe a fever, that rest helped recovery, and that clean air mattered. Beyond that, things got creative. Very creative. Sometimes in a way that today would feel more like a charming anecdote than serious treatment. So, if you find yourself under the weather tonight, just remember, medieval folks had it worse. They had bloodletting barbers, overcautious astrologers, herbal poultices, and a lot of nervous praying. And yet, they survived. Or at least, some of them did. And in a way, that's the quiet, strangely comforting message of medieval medicine: life is fragile, remedies are weird, but somehow, people found a way to carry on epidemics, royal fevers, and peculiar prescriptions. Alright, let's settle in again. Picture yourself in a quiet candlelit room. Maybe the wind is softly rattling the shutters. Somewhere, a medieval physician is arguing with a king about whether his cough is due to too much phlegm or an ill-aligned star. Tonight, we'll float into the world of epidemics, fevers, and the curious concoctions medieval people used to cope. Epidemics were an ever-present background hum of life in the Middle Ages. Cities were crowded, sanitation was flexible at best, and people traveled surprisingly far on foot or horseback, spreading disease along the way. One of the most famous examples, of course, was the Black Death. But before we get to that iconic disaster, let's talk about more mundane fevers, colds, and infections that were basically a part of daily life. If a peasant developed a fever, advice ranged from sipping herbal teas to avoiding bad airs. Yes, miasma theory was everywhere, the idea that disease floated invisibly through the air like an invisible fog of doom. To ward it off, people would burn incense, hang herbs around their homes, or simply avoid the neighbor who sneezed too much. Imagine tiptoeing past your friend because you suspected their cough might be contagious. Charming, isn't it? Meanwhile, nobles had a slightly different approach. If a queen caught a fever, she might be carried to a scented bath, surrounded by lavender and rose petals, attended by 4 or 5 physicians, each offering conflicting advice. One might insist on bloodletting, another on warm compresses, while astrologers argued that Mercury's retrograde was definitely the culprit. The queen herself might lie there, wondering whether dying from a fever or from sheer confusion was worse. And then there were the plague doctors, because we can't talk about medieval sickness without them. Those iconic beaked masks weren't just for style. People believed that stuffing them with aromatic herbs would filter out bad air. They carried sticks to prod patients from a safe distance, probably the earliest form of social distancing. Of course, this didn't prevent infection, but it did create a very distinctive, slightly terrifying aesthetic for anyone wandering through a plague-ridden town. Medical theory in the Middle Ages also embraced very creative dietary advice. Feeling weak? Eat chicken boiled in wine. Feverish? Drink some vinegar mixed with honey and maybe a hint of crushed mint. Upset stomach? A little roast pigeon might help. And if the patient was wealthy, they might try powdered pearls or gold leaf, because luxury cures were apparently effective in ways that science would never explain. Or perhaps they were effective in ways the bank would, but that's a story for another time. Let's drift over to another curious practice, purges and enemas. If your humors were out of balance, a physician might recommend inducing vomiting or sending things the other way. Medieval people believed that cleansing the body externally could restore internal harmony. It sounds extreme to modern ears, but back then, it was considered quite sensible. Some patients, naturally, didn't survive the regimen, either because the illness worsened or because, well, the treatment was vigorous. And then there were leeches. Yes, leeches. People adored them. They were the tiny, squirmy tools of bloodletting, attached with surgical precision to whatever area of the body seemed most imbalanced. They were sold at markets, kept in little jars, and sometimes shipped across regions for the more fashionable clients. Imagine opening a velvet pouch and seeing a tiny, wriggling, suctioning creature ready to drain your excess black bile. Delightful. Now, epidemics deserve a bit more gentle floating attention. Smallpox, measles, influenza, they all ran through towns in predictable cycles. Doctors and midwives had few defenses besides isolation, herbal remedies, and, occasionally, experimental inoculation. Yes, even before modern vaccination, some people tried to deliberately expose themselves to mild cases, hoping for immunity. It worked sometimes, failed other times, and always added an element of psychological stress. But at least it gave people something to do. Royal illnesses often became public spectacles. When a king fell sick, messages were sent across the land. Nobles debated treatment plans in whispered corridors. Physicians quarreled over whether to bleed, purge, or simply let nature take its course. Chronic conditions like gout, fevers, or recurring infections were treated with elaborate routines involving diet, baths, herbs, and, of course, astrology. Kings sometimes survived, sometimes didn't, but the performance of care was almost as important as the outcome. It reassured subjects that their ruler was actively suffering in a civilized, ritualized way. And while doctors focused on physical ailments, spiritual healing remained a cornerstone. Illness was sometimes a punishment or a test. Patients were advised to pray, make pilgrimages, or wear charms. The boundary between faith and medicine was blurry, but that blur created a rhythm to daily life, one part observation, one part ritual, one part polite resignation. Interestingly, some treatments now sound quite subtle. A light massage, careful breathing, herbal baths, all intended to soothe rather than cure. Medieval physicians understood that sometimes gentle care was as important as dramatic interventions. The body could heal itself, and a calm environment might help. It wasn't always effective, but at least it was low risk. Hospitals, often run by monks and nuns, were quiet, orderly places. Beds were shared, sanitation was minimal, and prayers punctuated the day. Patients were fed, tended, and watched over with careful attention. Sometimes illness resolved, sometimes it didn't. The monks would keep meticulous records, offering insight for future physicians. And in a way, this combination of observation, superstition, and routine laid the groundwork for more systematic medicine later on. Even minor injuries were treated with care. Cuts might be cleansed with wine or vinegar, stitched with sinew, and bandaged with cloth. Herbs were applied to reduce infection, sometimes accompanied by a whispered prayer. Pain relief was limited, so patients often relied on resilience and stoicism. Recovery depended on luck, patience, and the occasional effective herb. And, of course, people accepted the unpredictability. Medieval medicine was as much about ritual, comfort, and hope as it was about curing disease. Folk remedies, royal interventions, prayers, and a dash of leech therapy all coexisted in a delicate balance. People understood that death was a neighborly presence, always nearby, but that gentle care and observant habits might prolong life, or at least make it more tolerable. So, as you drift further into this quiet world, you can imagine the rhythms of medieval life, a patient sipping chamomile, a queen lying in a perfumed bath, a monk scribbling notes in a dimly lit hospital, all under the watchful eye of fate and the occasional passing comet. Medicine was slow, gentle, and oddly comforting in its persistence. People did what they could, using the tools, beliefs, and knowledge available. And somehow, they carried on, royal fevers, curious cures, and epidemic lives. Alright, let's settle back in. Imagine yourself in a quiet chamber with a faint draft coming through the stone walls. Outside, towns bustle with merchants, carts, and the occasional worried family rushing home. Somewhere nearby, a royal physician is quietly wringing his hands over a sick king, wondering whether the problem is humoral imbalance or Mercury being particularly mischievous. Tonight, we'll float through the stories of famous medieval figures who fell ill, how their courts responded, and the gentle absurdity of some of their treatments. Take King Charles VI of France, for example. He reigned during the late 14th century and was prone to sudden bouts of madness. Now, modern historians might blame mental illness, but in his own time, these episodes were carefully documented as mysterious fevers or imbalances of humors. When Charles became agitated or withdrawn, physicians recommended a combination of bloodletting, herbal baths, and music therapy. Yes, music therapy. Gentle minstrels played tunes meant to calm the king's mind, because nothing says, return to sanity, like a lute and a softly plucked harp. And sometimes, just sometimes, it worked. Or at least it calmed the courtiers who had to watch the king wander the halls in his nightshirt muttering about invisible enemies. Meanwhile, Queen Isabella of England, a few centuries earlier, had her own brush with illness. Royal records note that she suffered from persistent fevers and general malaise. Her treatment included elaborate herbal baths, dietary restrictions, mostly consisting of broths and lightly spiced meats, and a rotating team of physicians who argued constantly about the correct method of bloodletting. Astrologers were consulted too, and certain treatments were timed according to the moon. Imagine coordinating your daily routine not just around meals and prayers, but also the precise alignment of Venus. It's a wonder anyone had time to eat. Not all royal treatments were so subtle, though. Edward I, known as Longshanks, had gout, a common affliction among the wealthy due to rich diets. Physicians prescribed purges, warm baths, and, sometimes, small doses of mercury. Mercury. That's right. It was believed to balance humors and alleviate swelling. Unfortunately, it could also cause additional symptoms, tremors, digestive upset, and in extreme cases, a kind of feeble lethargy. The king endured this with admirable patience, though he may have wished for simpler treatments, like just cutting back on meat pies. Let's float over to epidemics again, because the interaction between disease and royalty was always fascinating. When the plague swept through Europe, kings and queens often had a mix of practical and ceremonial responses. Nobles would quarantine themselves in castles, while physicians advised fumigating rooms with smoke, keeping windows open, and wearing scented masks. Prayers and processions complemented these measures. In some ways, it was a theatrical performance of care, reassuring subjects that their rulers were actively working to survive, and that surviving was, somehow, a shared concern. Among ordinary people, responses were a little less coordinated but equally interesting. Villagers might isolate themselves, hang herbs to ward off disease, or seek out local healers with their own secret remedies. Some relied on charms or amulets, believing they could physically repel sickness. One could imagine a medieval kitchen cluttered with garlic, dried flowers, and scraps of parchment inscribed with protective prayers. It was a domestic ecosystem of hope, observation, and mild panic. And then there were treatments that might feel strangely modern, if we squint. Gentle exercise, careful rest, bathing in clean water, and even a bit of nutritious food were recommended in some cases. Physicians observed, experimented, and wrote notes, sometimes achieving real results despite their limited understanding. The line between superstition and careful empirical observation was blurry, but it was there. People weren't entirely helpless, they simply operated in a world with different rules. Consider Margaret of Anjou, queen consort of Henry VI. She suffered multiple fevers and bouts of weakness throughout her life. Herbal remedies were her constant companions. Peppermint, rosemary, and sage were used in teas, ointments, and baths. Physicians argued about bloodletting, but ultimately, Margaret's recovery often depended on rest, nutrition, and a surprisingly meticulous routine. Meanwhile, her courtiers debated endlessly about astrology and the influence of planets, as though the alignment of stars could somehow outweigh chamomile tea. And then there are the smaller, everyday maladies. Headaches, mild fevers, digestive upsets, conditions we take for granted today. These were treated with a mix of diet, herbal infusions, and gentle purges. Sometimes they involved humor-specific prescriptions, like cooling foods for excess heat, warming ointments for coldness, or even simple advice to get out of damp clothing. Subtle, slow, repetitive actions created a rhythm to life that was both practical and ritualistic. Hospitals, again, deserve a quiet note. Monastic hospitals provided beds, clean water when possible, and regular attention. Nuns and monks oversaw herbal infusions, bandaging, and prayers. Mortality remained high, but care was consistent. The act of tending itself was comforting, both for the patient and the caretaker. People understood that attention, ritual, and observation were sometimes more powerful than dramatic interventions. Another fascinating practice was the use of sympathetic magic. Sometimes a piece of an animal, a herb, or even a personal object was believed to influence health. A feverish patient might have a small stone placed under the pillow or a poultice applied over a certain part of the body. Effectiveness? Hard to measure. But ritual consistency mattered. The act itself reinforced hope, calm, and order. Even sleep was prescribed. Physicians noted that restful sleep could restore humoral balance and help recover from illness. Patients were encouraged to rest, avoid overexertion, and sometimes even meditate. If anything, this was a very modern idea. Slow, calm routines, paired with herbal teas, gentle massages, and quiet observation, were surprisingly effective at keeping people alive long enough for natural recovery to take place. So, as we drift further into the sleepy world of medieval medicine, a pattern emerges. Illness was both physical and spiritual, treated with a blend of herbs, bloodletting, prayer, diet, and ritual. The wealthy might add astrology, baths, and elaborate therapies, the poor relied on observation, home remedies, and communal knowledge. Everyone existed within a framework of hope, patience, and subtle care. And somehow, even in a world without modern science, people survived. Tonight, as you imagine yourself sipping a soothing herbal infusion, perhaps on a cool, quiet night, remember the medieval patient, lying in a simple bed, a small poultice on the forehead, listening to a monk chant softly nearby. Not cured, perhaps, but cared for. Not entirely understood, but gently observed. And in that gentle observation, a strange, sleepy kind of comfort existed, the kind that allowed people to drift, slowly, toward recovery or rest, surrounded by ritual, routine, and the quiet patience of those who watched over them.